Problem solved? Maybe crisis averted, maybe debt deal done. Any one of those supposed headlines would contain some truth, but tell an inaccurate story about the fiscal cliff. Now, here to examine what actually got done, what's still left to do, and what it means for New Mexico, most importantly, Laura Sanchez, our good friend and attorney, she joins us once more. Former U.S. Commerce Department official Jamie Estrada is back. Editor of the website Capitol Report New Mexico, Rob Nikolewski, joins us, and former Democratic Party Chairman John Wertheimer, our good friend, he is back as well. Now, Jamie, the chief Republican complaint about the deal is that, well, the chief complaint. There are many complaints. Not enough spending cuts to be a serious effort. The president clearly had a lot of leverage going into this. And the last time he had leverage, he didn't seem to be able to find the lever. This time he seemed to have found it. What does this mean for Republicans? Because this was a real hold-your-nose vote, as they say.
Yeah. It's a tough thing for Republicans, but Republicans still have a tremendous amount of leverage going into February or March, whenever we run out of money and we actually have to go back for a renewal of the debt ceiling. Or an extension, or an increase in the debt ceiling is what I'm trying to say. So at that point, Republicans say, look, we're not going to approve an increase until we get the spending cuts that we want. Sound familiar? This is exactly what we had going on, just about a year ago. And so, but I think the president probably has a little bit more capital going into it this time. That's the difference here for the president, and I think that's going to be a tenuous situation, because Republicans, again, don't want to be blamed for this, as I think to a certain degree the party was the last time this happened, and then was leading up to the point where maybe we were going to have a government shutdown. And government shutdowns are not popular, no matter who is in charge. Everyone gets blamed for that.
That's right. Well, not necessarily everybody. Republicans stood to be. The bad guys.
It takes leadership, right? And so I think the president needs to take a tremendous amount of leadership here to prevent that from happening. Republicans, have to use their leverage in order to get extract the spending cuts that they want. So
on the other side of it, John, I was listening to Air America as this was rolling along, as well as other things, Hannity, and I just listened to everything. But it was interesting to listen to the president's supporters have a very big problem with the negotiations here. Talk about Republicans feeling like not enough was done. A lot of folks on the left felt like we have some serious issues if we're going to be dinging elders who are living alone to make a deal with Republicans. So did the president actually win something here, or are there issues that he's going to have to deal with within his own circle going down the road?
I think he did a good job. He held the line. There's no question that there are people on the kind of farther left of the party who voted against it, a handful in the Senate. And really the more conservative Democrats voted against it in the Senate by and large, and a few of the more left-wing House members. But pretty much on the Democratic side, as a former Democratic Party chairman, I'm in glee right now, because for the first time in living memory, the Democratic Party has been much more disciplined than the Republican Party, which just never happens. The reality is I think the Republicans are in complete disarray. They have no idea what to do with the Tea Party movement. They were extreme. We got to remember there was a deal on the table a year when we were dealing with the debt ceiling to cut spending by $4 trillion from the president. That got kicked out as not being aggressive enough, and now they're stuck with a much worse deal. And so what I would say is the Tea Party had a huge defeat. By and large, the Democratic Party is unified.
Let me stop you there with the by and large. Are you okay, you personally, or your sense of things, with the level that things sat at on who's going to get taxed above what rate? The president had made it clear a little while ago he wanted 250,000 to be the line above that. That didn't happen. It kicked up to $1 million. Now we settled somewhere around 400,000. Is that still okay as far as making a deal for you?
Well, it's not okay. I mean, I would prefer, but I mean, in politics, we don't control all. We control almost all three branches of government, but not quite with the House of Representatives. Now, the House of Representatives is the least popular political institution in our country right now, perhaps the least popular in the history of the country. And there's a reason for that. It's dysfunctional. They couldn't even pass the Sandy relief bill. And this is a really dysfunctional political institution. And so, sure, I find it ridiculous that what this debate ended up being. We were going to take big cuts in the stock market and huge uncertainty in the business community so that people could, making between $250,000 and $400,000 would get a tax break. That's just absurd. That's a lot of taxable income, and the whole country should not be held hostage for that. But then again, I understand why the president and Harry Reid and the Democratic congressional leaders in the House had to do that deal. But nobody's happy with it. But it's an understandable compromise.
There you go. That sounds like politics. And Rob, one of the interesting bits of this whole drama is our Newly re-elected Speaker of the House, John Boehner. He survived his vote as we taped this earlier in the day. He had an impossible situation, it seems to me.
Yeah.
You know, he really did. He had a flank on his right that John mentioned. He had a whole other people had a lot of problems with this all the way down the line. Could he have done anything differently here?
I don't know if he really could have, because I think the political reality is, and I'm a fiscal conservative, and I wasn't crazy about this deal at all. But having said that, the president had all the marbles in this thing. He won the election in November. Politics is just as much perception as reality. And the perception was that if we had gone over the cliff, the Republicans would have gotten the lion's share of the blame.
That's right.
So Boehner was stuck in this position where if he stayed true to the fiscal conservatives and made people like me happy, the upshot would be that he and the Republicans would take the big hit for this thing, especially here in New Mexico, because New Mexico is so dependent upon federal dollars that if people at Holloman Air Force Base, probably vote for Republicans more than anything else, they wouldn't be happy either.
That's right.
So I think Boehner was in a very tough position.
It's interesting. We'll come back to Mr. Boehner in a second. But Laura, good to see you again. I know you're a little under the weather. Thank you for coming in. For Democrats, when you think about what this victory means, John mentioned earlier, or Jamie did rather, there's another leg of this coming down the road, not that far. So perhaps the White House shouldn't do too much of an end zone dance at this point. There's a lot of things yet to go. But in the overall chess match of this, how is this shaping up for the president? Does his leverage still hold? Does he have the public behind him? Does all those little pieces that mean something?
I think that he can still have the public behind him. I think he's still got the marbles, he's still got the leverage that we've been talking about, but I think that it's a delicate balance. And I think in this situation, overall, there's a lot of people that are just completely disgusted with the whole, and I fall into that more than the end zone victory dance side of it right now, maybe because I'm under the weather. But I think if, like most Americans, if you've been watching this over the holiday season about, is this going to happen, is it not going to happen, all you're seeing is a whole lot of elected officials not doing their job by the deadline. If, the rest of us, if we don't meet our deadlines, we get into serious trouble.
There you go.
Apparently, when Congress doesn't meet their deadlines, they just get to redo it later after the deadline and extend their own deadline. It's just really disappointing. What are we supposed to tell younger generations about when your homework is due or when your briefs are due or whatever? So in that sense, it's just overall not a good time to be celebrating what happened. On the other hand, at least there was a decision made. There was an actual there was something that was passed. But I think the impact to people here in New Mexico is still going to be significant. I mean, certainly we see already impact to people who have unemployment, basically are unemployment. There's been a lag in benefits, and already that's causing problems for a lot of people. I think also the payroll taxes, anybody who's making $50,000 and above are going to see about $1,000 in payroll tax increases over the next year. That's a significant increase. That's $85 extra if you make $50,000, $85 a month extra that you're going to be looking at approximately taken out. So, it's the cost of cable or whatever it is that you
We all did the calculus when you said it. I can think of a bill that would automatically.
Everybody can think of that, and so that's going to have an impact to our economy here and our families. And I think that that's a big disappointment.
So what do the Republicans bounce back with? I'm going to go to Jamie on this as well. But actually, I'm sorry, Rob, I'm going to start with Jamie on this one. My fault. Where do the Republicans come back with this now? Is there a way to regroup and say, okay, we had to punt on this one. The cards just weren't in it on this last vote, but we have a lot of leverage, like you mentioned earlier, about the vote that's coming up. But in the interim, what has to happen for Republicans?
I think Republicans need to lay down some really serious ideas that were, many of them which were articulated during the presidential campaign, about real reform. And I think there's a hunger out there. Many people are disgusted by this on both sides.
Is there will for this, though? Let me interrupt for a second because of the reaction Mr. Ryan got to his plan. I mean, are people in the mood for austerity these days? What I mean? There's different flavors of this whole thing.
Right. But I think part of it is, look, if the president wants more revenues going in, the biggest key to revenue is economic growth. What kind of country do we want that would actually pave the way for more aggressive economic growth? 3-4% GDP.
That'd be nice, wouldn't it?
It'd be really nice.
Yes.
And you know what? The revenues in the Treasury would be going way up. And we wouldn't be having these conversations about, the tax increases on a certain income level, because it'd be so much more irrelevant, because we're talking about the volume of just driving the economy. But we need to have those conversations. And I don't see them happening. I think that if the Republicans can start putting some real substantive ideas out there about what it takes to be a competitive country in this world, then I think we might actually get there.
Sure. Medicare, Medicaid, something has to happen. I mean, everybody knows this. No matter what side of the aisle you're on, any reasonable person can look at this and says, we need to tweak this a little bit. Means testing's been out there. A lot of other things have been out there. Does the president have some wiggle room to negotiate with going into this next round that Laura and Jamie were talking about? Can he give a little bit more without having a
Well, I think ultimately, you know, I really do believe the president was willing to do a grand bargain at like the $4 trillion in savings. And just so the viewers understand, I mean, this would achieve something like maybe less than $1 trillion in savings, this fix, even if we extended it out for 10 years. So it's really a Band-Aid on the debt problem. I think I'm basically a fiscally conservative Democrat. That's a different definition than what a fiscally conservative Republican is. But the bottom line is that, you know, I believe in balanced budgets. I think a majority of Democrats do. The real problem has been this absolute dogmatism on revenue enhancement taxes. And that any grand bargain that's going to fix Medicaid and Medicare has got to include you know, some permanent fixes on the revenue side that the Republicans so far have been unwilling to even talk about.
Well, let me ask you about something. We're under a minute for everybody here, but some things that Democrats are not willing to talk about. It seems pretty clear the things I'm reading says if we really want to have revenue in this, it's going to have to go down near 100,000 or maybe even below that. Everyone's going to have to take a ding if really revenue is going to be the thing that turns us around. Can Democrats support something like that?
Well, I mean, I don't buy into that premise. I don't know that you have to raise taxes on the sincere middle class in order to balance the budget. In fact, I don't think you do. I think it'd be a very bad economic idea because the driver of economic growth is the middle class. I mean, we grow this economy from the middle out, not from the top down. That's the fundamental philosophical debate between the Republicans and the Democrats right now. We grow it from the middle out, not the top down.
But the middle class is where the money is. And
it really is. It's the biggest pot, right?
That's where the president has been heading all along. Even with Obamacare, many of those taxes are going to impact the middle class.
Interesting. In 10 seconds.
You cannot raise enough taxes to fix this thing. That's like getting a bigger bucket when you've got a leaking ship. You have to fix the leak, and the leak isn't spending.
There you go. We're going to take a quick break, and when we return, Gary Smith from congressional candidate to accused felon.